The Modern Movement in America, Chapter 17. America was introduced to modernism at the 1913 Armory Show, but it was met by public protest and initially rejected. The same reaction awaited Jan Tichol's elementary typography. A small group of American typographers and designers like William Addison Dwiggins, S.A. Jacobs, Merle Armitage, and Lester Beale recognized the value of these new ideas, and modernism slowly gained ground, especially in book design, editorial design for fashion and business magazines that catered to affluent audiences, and promotional and corporate graphics. When the Bauhaus closed in 1933, faculty, students, and alumni dispersed throughout the world, making modern design a truly international movement. Gropius, Mies van der Rohe, and Breuer brought functionalist architecture to America, while Herbert Bayer and Laszlo Moholy-Nagy brought innovative approaches to graphic design. Moholy-Nagy opened the new Bauhaus in Chicago, and when it failed, he opened the School of Design. Other European designers who came to America were Jean Carlou, Herbert Matter, Ladislav Sutnar, and Will Burton, and they made major contributions to the visual interpretation of graphic information. By the 1930s, modernist European design had become a significant influence in America. Again, modernism was first met with rejection, but the Bauhaus teachers came to the United States, and modernism began to thrive in certain sectors. Another factor was the Great Depression and the Works Progress Administration that was established because of Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal. We'll talk more about that in a moment. The style characteristics of the modern movement in America are a Bauhaus influence, but American content. WPA typography for social programs. WPA stands for the Works Progress Administration. So as I said, this was the time of the Great Depression. And here's a photo by Walker Evans. His Atlanta photograph contrasts decaying homes and Depression-era movie posters. It's a chasm, really, between reality and graphic fantasy. The Great Depression was a severe worldwide economic depression that took place mostly in the 30s, beginning in the U.S. The timing of the Great Depression varied across the world. In most countries, it started in 1929 and lasted until the late 1930s. It wasn't uncommon to see bread lines or signs like these. William Addison Dwiggins began designing books for Alfred Knopf in 1926 and established Knopf's reputation for excellence in book design. His stenciled ornaments, such as in The Power of Printin' Men, combine the sensibility of Cubist collage with the grace of traditional ornament. He also designed 18 typefaces for Mergenthaler Linotype. Here we see a title page for a poem by E.E. Cummings, one of my favorite poets. Here, typography is implying an image which joins with rules and ornaments to suggest a landscape. Merle Armitage was another contributor to modernism. Here we see sans serif capitals that are letter spaced and separated by hairline rules. This is Erte. He was an immigrant who made a huge impact on stage as well as on the pages of Harper's Bazaar with these wonderful illustrations that he created. An important phase in the development of American graphic design resulted from the migration of many European cultural leaders who fled the rise of Nazism in Europe. 4 Russian-born immigrants who brought European modernism to American graphic design were Erté, Dr. Aga, Alexei Brodovich, and Alexander Lieberman. Their work focused on editorial design for fashion magazines. Now, Erté was a major proponent of Art Deco and designed covers and fashion illustration for Harper's Bazaar magazine. His work combined the stylized drawing of synthetic cubism, exotic decorativeness, and the elegance of high fashion. Aga was the first art director trained in modern design to guide the graphic destiny of a major American periodical. As art director of Vogue and later Vanity Fair and House and Garden, he introduced bleed photography, machine set sans serif type, white space, and asymmetrical layouts. This is the photography of Martin Munkowski, an Hungarian photographer who was hired as a staff photographer at Harper's Bazaar. He stopped long-held conventions of editorial photography in the face of creating really new compositions. He was one of a new breed of editorial and advertising photographers who combined the visual dynamic learned from Laszlo Moholy-Nagy and Man Ray with the fresh approach to photography made possible by the new 35mm Leica miniature camera. Rejecting the conventions of the studio, Munkowski allowed outside locations and the natural movements of his models to suggest innovative possibilities. Alexei Brodovich, the art director of Harper's Bazaar from 1934 till 1958. With an affinity for white space and sharp type on clear, open pages, he rethought the approach to editorial design. He sought a musical feeling in the flow of text and pictures. The rhythmic environment of open space balancing text was energized by the art and photography he commissioned from major European artists such as A.M. Cassandra, Salvador Dali, and Man Ray. Brodovich taught designers how to use photography. His cropping, enlargement, and juxtaposition of images, and his exquisite selection from contact sheets were all accomplished with extraordinary intuitive judgment. He saw contrast as a dominant tool in editorial design and paid close attention to the graphic movement through the editorial pages of each and every issue. His work with Man Ray. These are pages from Harper's Bazaar. Check out the figures oblique thrust that inspired a dynamic typographic page with several sizes and weights of geometric sans serifs. Here's another collaboration with Man Ray. The forms and textures of this experimental photograph are amplified and complemented by the typographic design that Brodovich employed. Here's a collaboration with A.M. Cassandra. A perfume bottle, a nose, lipstick mouth, and powder puff cheek achieve simultaneity. And some additional Harper's Bazaar covers from the 30s and 40s. These are a cover and pages for Portfolio by Brodovich. Screen tints produce the illusion that translucent rectangles of pink and blue-gray had been placed on the stencil logo, slashing down the back cover. On the right, we see a very typical editorial spread with innovative typography and cropping. 2 pages from Mummer's Parade fold out to reveal a dynamic cropping and juxtaposition of images that are treated in a compelling way. Joseph Binder used an airbrush to achieve highly finished forms. His strong cubist beginnings eventually yielded to a stylized realism. The subject matter became dominant and design qualities were subordinated to pictorial imagery. With his powerful shapes and well-defined subjects, Binder remained a force on the American design scene until the 1960s. His military recruiting posters were among the last manifestations of pictorial modernism and became ingrained in the American consciousness during the 1950s. The geometric and symbolic shapes of pictorial modernism were converted into monolithic masses, symbolizing military might and the technological accomplishments of a new era of sophisticated weaponry. Here's a beautiful poster that he did for the New York World's Fair. He came to the United States where a strong Cubist approach from his Vienna period yielded to this kind of stylized realism. Here, America's embrace of modernism, technology, and global power is signified. In this work, we really see the Bauhaus influence, but the American content. Here's a recruiting poster for the Navy. We see echoes of A.M. Cassandra steamship posters. Remember those? The strength expressed is more powerful, however, and forbidding in this Navy poster. In 1935, as part of Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal, the federal government created the Works Progress Administration, also known as the WPA, and this provided job opportunities for the unemployed. The WPA Federal Art Project enabled actors, musicians, visual artists, and writers to continue their professional careers. Roosevelt realized that art was part of the soul of this country and supported it through these efforts. A poster project was included, and thousands of posters were designed and silkscreen printed for government-sponsored cultural activities. Now, this included theater performances and art exhibitions, public service communication about health, crime prevention, housing, or education. The flat color characteristic of silkscreen combined with the influences from the Bauhaus pictorial modernism and constructivism produce a modernist result that contrasted with traditional illustration. Beale understood Tichel's new typography and Dada's random organization, intuitive placement of elements, and use of chance in the creative process. He experimented with planes of flat color, photomontage, and overprinting. Beale's posters for the Rural Electrification Administration, a federal agency responsible for bringing electricity to less populated areas of America, combined photography, graphic signs, and type into concise pro-electrification messages. During the 50s and 60s, Beale became increasingly involved in the corporate design movement. Here, the benefits of electricity were presented through signs understandable to illiterate audiences. Another poster for the Rural Electrification Administration. So if you see a poster that looks like it's for a government program, most likely you're going to be looking at modern movement in America. I wanted you to see the entire series that he created and notice how he uses the same graphic elements and stylization to unify the poster series. Direct relief for the unemployed was replaced by work opportunities, and billions of dollars were infused into the economy as an average of more than 2 million workers were paid from $15 to $90 per month from 1935 to 1941. Now, WPA launched the Federal Art Project in 1935. Sculptors and painters joined unemployed illustrators and graphic designers in the studios. As many designs were by artists, and it's not surprising that the project took a strong aesthetic approach to type, which was used as both a compositional element and a message communicator. I've just returned from my very first trip to the Grand Canyon. I always wanted to go there, and it delivered in such a big way. National parks really protect and preserve what's best about our nation. You have the striking natural beauty, the amazing wildlife, all the history and opportunities to just get outside and have fun. No wonder they're called America's best idea. Well, the WPA artists were put to work making these posters for national parks, and they are very collectible, and you'll still see them in parks today. Additional posters from the WPA were for music projects or gallery exhibitions that were held, or theater productions. Again, keeping the arts alive in the time of the Great Depression. From 1935 until 1939, when the Federal Art Project was abolished, over 2 million copies of approximately 35,000 poster designs were produced. There are books that document all of these marvelous posters, and you can also go online and search them out. America's wartime graphics commissioned by the U.S. Office of War Information range from posters to informational training materials to amateurish cartoons. In 1941, when America entered the global conflict and it seemed inevitable, the federal government began to develop propaganda posters to promote production. This is a great example, Carlow's famous America's Answer production. Visual and verbal elements are inseparably locked into an intense symbol of productivity and labor. Take a look at that O and how wonderful that integration is with the overall illustration. Here's another piece for the U.S. Office of War Information. The placement of the two-part headline implies a rectangle. This symmetry is animated by the off-center placement of the white cross. Edward McKnight Kauffer and Baer were among the other designers commissioned by the Office of War Information to create posters in support of the war effort. Baer, Carlow, and Matter joined Jacobson in developing an ad campaign for CCA, the Container Corporation of America, that continued the experimentation of earlier institutional ads. Strong visuals were used in these ads with 2 or 3 lines of type placed diagonally in counterpoint to compositional lines in the illustration or montage. This campaign promoted paperboard packaging, which freed metals and other materials that were needed for the war effort. This is the work of a great fine artist, Ben Shahn, whose social realist paintings address political and economic injustice during the Depression. He reached a larger audience, however, in his posters by conveying Nazi brutality. Shahn achieved communicative power with intense graphic forms, the implication of a prison by closing the space with a wall, the hooded mask that clouds the victim's identity. A dire crisis is conveyed using the most direct words and imagery possible. A poster supporting polio research by Herbert Baer. The diagonal shaft of the test tube leads the eye from the red and blue headline to the flowing yellow light that is beginning to dawn, linking the elements in the same manner as the thick black bars of Baer's Bauhaus work. A major figure in the development of American modernist design was the Chicago industrialist Walter Papecky, who founded the Container Corporation of America. Papecky recognized that design could both serve a pragmatic business purpose and become a major cultural thrust on the part of the corporation. He was also a patron of design and provided moral and financial support for the Institute of Design that was started by Moholy-Nagy. CCA established a department of design, and Egbert Jacobson was selected as its first director. Like Peter Behrens, who developed the identity system for AEG earlier in the century, Jacobson developed an identity system for CCA. Cassandra was commissioned by the art director Charles Coiner of the NWA advertising agency to create an ad campaign for CCA. The innovative campaign departed from the conventional headline and long-winded body copy of most 1930s advertising by featuring a dominant visual supported by a simple statement. When Cassandra returned to Paris, CCA continued his approach and commissioned ads from other artists and designers of international stature like Beyer, Fernand Léger, Man Ray, Herbert Matter, and Jean Carlu. Here's a piece by Herbert Matter for CCA. He's a European graphic designer who came to America and made a lot of contributions to design in his work for CCA. Magazines as well, including Vogue, Fortune, and Harper's Bazaar, and for 20 years as a graphic design and photography consultant to the Knoll Associates furniture design and manufacturing firm. After World War II, the United States converted industry from wartime needs to consumer markets. CCA created several noteworthy ad campaigns, the State Series and the Great Ideas campaign. In the State Series, artists were commissioned to create paintings for each of the 48 states. This series advanced a Bauhaus idea, the union of art and life. The Great Ideas campaign, which ran over 3 decades, presented the great ideas of Western culture, including themes about liberty, justice, and human rights. Now, institutional advertising was a great idea that began at CCA. In other words, don't just sell your products, do something that has to do with the greater good, and people will pay attention to your company. So the influence of the modern movement in America today is left with us in the stunning posters. Here's a book about WPA posters that we have in our graphic design library at City College. Again, these posters continue to fuel generations of new great ideas. Let's take a look. On the left, we see a poster for the Rural Electrification Administration by Lester Beale. On the right, we see a poster definitely inspired by his work that was created after Hurricane Katrina to try to get aid to the victims and to the region.